The Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime introduced the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! To the world, and with it, many of the now iconic cards that have gone on to inspire waves of support, from the ever-present Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon, to some more, let's say, interesting choices, like Giant Soldier of Stone and Jack's Knight. But all of these archetypes suffer from one core problem, and it's the simple fact that they're outdated, even at the time the support was printed. Because their strategy is trying to build around monsters that were printed in 2002, and that tends to make an archetype not very good. And while it might be tempting to say that the Duel Monsters characters would simply be playing their archetypes with all the shiny new bells and whistles from recent years, I think it might be interesting to try and assign each of them with a modern deck that functions in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh!, even if it isn't the most competitive. I'm going to go in reverse order of significance, so that way you're going to have to stick around to the end if you want to see me talk about characters like Yugi and Kaiba. Starting off with the most one-note character on this list, Bonds. Who is this guy, and what's he doing here? He has barely 2 jewels, and he really doesn't amount to much in the grand scheme of things. But the reason he gets a mention at all is because Konami has already answered this question for me, and not in a way that I'm all too satisfied with. You see, in Duel Links, he was a rather late addition for obvious reasons. As a result of this, in order to release him with cards that players would actually want, they gave his deck a facelift, giving him a series of Ghost Trick monsters as the new core of the deck. I don't really like this, for one because they don't really seem to thematically fit him. Besides having quite a few zombies, they're all far too cutesy, and Bonds' deck was full of gruesome monsters. Besides that, Ghost Tricks really aren't, and have never really been a viable deck, besides as a UFD engine. So, I hear you ask, what would you give him in your infinite wisdom? The answer, I think, is obvious. Whites. Not that kind of whites, the WIGHT kind. They're all zombies for one, and their skeletal visages are gruesome enough for Bonds. They're not really that good, but they can OTK competently enough. A perfect fit for a guy like Bonds. And finally, can't you just totally see Bonds as the kind of guy who's a big fan of white power? Mako Tsunami is next, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out what kind of deck he would play. This dude loves the water, and what better water deck for him than Atlantean Mermail? I can totally imagine Mako playing a more Atlantean, less Mermail deck, using cards like Deep Sea Diva to summon synchro bosses like Ravenous Crocodile Archetypes, and the White Aura series of monsters. They seem like they were practically designed to be used as an anime character's archetype, and I'm frankly shocked they never were. Rex Raptor also has fairly simple criteria for his deck, being that they just have to be dinosaurs. He may not have Dino DNA, but he sure loves his dinosaurs, ignoring Red Eyes Black Dragon and Serpent Night Dragon. As funny as it would be to give him something like Dinomorphia, the obvious answer is Bestia, and that's a classic pure dinosaur deck, with cards like Soul Eating Oviraptor and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno as a bust monster. Giant Rex especially feels like the kind of card Rex would play, and maybe that's because he literally does play it. Moving from Rex onto his counterpart, Weevil Underwood, who similarly defines his deck with a vague type of monsters. As much as there are technically other insect-based decks, B-Trooper definitely have to crawl their way to the top here, due to the fact that a lot of the deck is just kind of generic insect good stuff, with Battle Wasp and even Insecta cards seeing play. In classic Weevil fashion, however, he would probably be jamming as many different floodgates into his deck as possible. Next up is the inventor of Duel Monsters himself, Maximilian Pegasus, or Pemesis J. Crawford. This video was actually inspired by someone mentioning that a certain archetype would be an excellent fit for Pemesis, though I can't credit them as the post was on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anonymous Twitter. That archetype is, drumroll please, Prank Kids. They seem like a perfect modernization of the Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic, which Toons also went for. They do unfortunately fail to capture any of the sinister that was contained in the relinquished side of the deck, but you could circumvent this by splashing in another scarier looking archetype. or maybe some more sinister looking generic Link monsters, like the Nightmares, or even Relinquished Anima. Yami Bakura is an interesting one, because while there's a fairly simple, straightforward answer, there's also a far more interesting, cerebral one that I think could work, though it'd take more effort. The straightforward answer is Unchained, one of modern Yu-Gi-Oh's few scary-looking archetypes. They're all fiends, and there's lots of cool, occult imagery that we know and love from Bakura. Evil Eyes also capture his aesthetic quite well, but there's no way they're anywhere near good enough for this list. Sorry if you're an Evil Eye player. The more cerebral, complicated answer I mentioned, though, is Mr. Rune. Hear me out on this. Bakura has always been kind of an event duelist. When he shows up, the rules tend to get turned on their head. While Mr. Rune may not really fit Bakura in terms of aesthetic, they do kind of fit this event duel aura he has. The alternate WinCon in Mill is right up his alley, and the unique perspective of Mr. Rune cards is reminiscent to me of the evil spirit of the Ring Duel, where Yugi and his friends found himself inside the jewel. Overall, I don't know if I'd say Mr. Rune fits better than Unchained, but it's certainly interesting to think about. Moving on now to Bakura's boyfriend in Yami Marik. In the anime, Marik's strategy revolved turboing out a big golden asshole in the Winged Dragon of Ra, and supplemented it by playing annoying floodgates like Jam Defender and Vengeful Bog Spirit. What if I told you there was a deck in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That also turboed out a big golden asshole, and also played annoying floodgates? You would think that's a match made in heaven, right? And you would be right. Floodgate Eldritch is a perfect fit for Marik. They both love accessorizing, they both love being evil, and that's all they need. Mai Valentine, sadly, is the only notable female duelist in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, and the two different archetypes she uses, Harpies and Amazonesses, only seem to share the kind of idea of being strong women. And there are plenty of girls-only archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Lyrilisk or Trickstar, but there's really only one archetype that I feel would fit her without feeling too derivative of a different anime character, and it's Sky Striker. I know, boo me if you wish, but they've got the swords, like Amazonesses, and the mechas have wings, like from Harpies. Feel totally free to view this one as a complete stretch. It kind of is, but I genuinely believe they fit Mai decently well. Joey Whale is a bit of a fun one. There are so many different things I could do to Joey, and while a deck like Warrocks does thematically fit him, I don't want to disadvantage him like that. Someone in the thread I mentioned suggested Gren Maju, and while a big bungus beatdown is certainly the kind of playstyle that fits Joey, I don't think any of the monsters really fit his aesthetic. His theming is far more around warrior monsters, and with a semi-ace card like Flame Swordsman, I think it should come as no surprise that the Infernoble Knights are my pick. While it is cool that all the Infernoble Knights have literal flaming swords, the main thing that sold me on them was their use of the Immortal Phoenix Gearfried, a retrain of an iconic Joey monster. I feel like besides the core Infernoble strategy, he would also play a warrior synchro toolbox with cards like Crimson Blader and Driven Daredevil making appearances. You're probably expecting Kaiba next, but I want to save him for last. Besides, Yugi's a pretty simple character to define. His affinity for spellcasters, as well as his huge variety in attributes, makes him a perfect candidate for Invoked. I know, making the protagonist of your show play Invoked probably isn't a great idea, since you'll encourage people to play Invoked as a result, but Alistair's just a perfect fit for Yugi. Of course, Invoked itself does not a deck make, so he would need to play additional themes. Thankfully, I don't think that Dogmatica Invoked Shaddoll is a great fit for him, though perhaps Yugi without the Pharaoh would play Dogmatica. So here's where we get a little bit crazy. Yugi likes spellcasters, right? So let's give him all the spellcasters he can handle. That's right, I'm talking Endymion, Witchcraft, and Mythical Beast Majistics Invoked. Heck, you can even throw in some Dark Magician cards for nostalgia's sake. Now obviously he wouldn't be playing all of these cards all the time, but Yugi's known for playing a large variety of different archetypes, and over the course of the series he could certainly show off all these different archetypes. I know, saying he just plays like a bunch of different archetypes is a bit of a cop-out, But how could I choose? Besides, I think it'd be pretty cool to have him, like, progress through the different archetypes that span the Endymion lore. And now we come to the last duelist on our list, Seto Kaiba. Kaiba should seem like an obvious one. The dude loves dragons. Give him Dragon Link and call it a day. But that's far too simple. Besides, there's another deck that I think fits Kaiba pretty well, being Sword Soul Tenyi. And there were no worms when Duel Monsters was airing, but I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that if there were, Kaiba would have played some. The Tenyi spirits seem right up Kaiba's alley, and the Dragonkin aesthetic of the Sword Souls also seem like something he would play. Arch Nemesis Protoss seems like a perfect alternate boss monster given that Blue Eyes is off the table, but of course it's now banned. I think that Kaiba would play Tenyi Sword Soul right up until Protoss got banned, then go back to a classic 60 card Dragon Link. And his list would be fairly standard Dragon Link, but he would make a point of not playing any of the Red Eyes cards. And that's all I've got. How'd I go? Did you like it? Did I make any massive mistakes? Be sure to roast me about them in the comments. Or you can tell me I'm doing a good job, which I'll be very grateful for. Like all things, you get to choose. I'll see you soon, but bye for now.